Kolkata is home for me because
this incredible place of history on so many levels.
I know that you've played a key role in reviving Flurys. It's a historic tea room in Calcutta.
Me and Manish Malhotra, we joined on the same day.
Manish Malhotra from Indian Accent?
Yeah.
Oh, how cool.
We opened India's first food court, Etopia, the India Habitat Centre. I can't tell you what my best-selling item was on the menu because we don't talk about that anymore in India, but it came to me looking for that. Steak.
Some people come to Calcutta for a year and end up belonging to it for their whole life. Today on Host Diaries, we're with a man who didn't just cook in the city, he helped shape its modern food story. Chef Shaun Kenworthy trained in some of London's most finest kitchens, arrived in India 2 decades ago, and somewhere between Park Street, Flurys, and Calcutta's deep love for flavor, the city became his home. Shaun's journey is a story of food, culture, and romance with Calcutta. Thank you so much, Chef Shaun Kenworthy, for being on the show today. It's an absolute pleasure hosting you on Host Diaries. Let's begin by understanding your early days in the UK. If you could share a memory that inspired you to go into the culinary arts. We all know it's not an easy direction or an easy job to have. It's not something that you can sit. There's heat, there's sweat, and the pay isn't very good. So what pushed you in this direction? What made you go into the culinary world?
So I came from just a very, very simple working class family, actually. Working class Manchester. Family full of kind of like mill workers and steel workers. Just wasn't academic at all, realistically. I mean, it was the least thing on my mind. I think it was more about boredom, I think I'm definitely on the spectrum somewhere. I don't know where. Never tried to look for it. But I was always a twitchy, fiddly kid, really. Wasn't really listening too much to things. Found school very boring. But the things that I really love the most today, things like history, geography, English language, literature. I got unmarked papers and all of those. I mean, I think it was just very dull how they were taught, really. So the kind of classes that I went to school for were really just art. Growing up in a working class town, we had things like geometrical and engineering drawing. That was like a subject. Woodwork, metalwork, art, obviously some sport in there. And they were kind of like my favorite classes. I mean, I used to try and unattend most classes because it was so boring, really. And most of my reports were Shaun's very kind of like easily distracted, bit of a daydreamer. So I think that's kind of like my life story, I think. So if I go back to where I started, so I've been in a kitchen since I was like 14 or something. And again, that was so slightly different today, I think. I don't think you're allowed to work until you're 16 today. Back in those days, we all had part-time jobs from being 11 or 12 or something. My first job was a paper round when I was about 11, I think. I used to go to the local news agents at like 6 o'clock in the morning, pick up papers. So yeah, I first set foot in the kitchen. I think I was 14. I could have been just very, very late 13 or something. Washing dishes for some bit of extra pocket money at the weekend in a pub. And I'd work in the daytime. So it was quite good fun, really. I quite enjoyed hanging out with the chefs and stuff. After a couple of months, they started letting me do the starters and plating desserts. So it was good fun, I thought. And then when I was 16, I left school at 16, went to see my careers officer. And it was like, not many options for you, really. Which is fine, really. So you're obviously you're quite creative. You're quite arty, perhaps. So maybe you could be obviously, I'd quite enjoyed geometrical engineering, drawing, and art. And obviously, nobody would have ever said to you in a working class town, "Why don't you be an artist?" It was like unimaginable. But you could be a carpenter, perhaps. Maybe a hairdresser, or a cook, or a chef. I thought, okay, maybe I'll have a go at that. So that was really my starting point, realistically. And I did spend a lot of time with my grandmother when I was growing up. She was a great cook, I think, of the old school sense. My mum was a working mum. Like every lunch I'd spend at my grandmother's house, go there for lunch every day after school, and I'd spend most of my school holidays with her. And she was always in the kitchen, tinkering around with something, baking, cooking stews, hearty, simple stuff, really. Maybe my grandmother had part of that. My grandma, Hannah, perhaps. Maybe she was slightly more inspiring as I've gotten older, I think.
That's lovely. You came to India over 2 decades ago. That's a time where most people were not choosing India. India is not your conventional choice in the 1999-2000 time. People are going to other culinary destinations which are more up and coming. So your traditional ones are France, as you had mentioned, and then you have Singapore, Hong Kong, and all of these big melting pots of cuisine that are opening up. So what made you not choose those destinations but instead come to a place like India?
So I'd spent pretty much almost all of the 90s in London. really. I did go back up to, so I grew up in Manchester, and I did go back there once to open quite an amazing restaurant, really, for a guy called Oliver Payton, who had restaurants all over London, still does to a certain extent. It was quite a maverick space. So where do I begin? So I'd gone to London. I think, and like I say, I started off quite naively, really. I think when I went into cooking, or when I started work in the industry, it's probably one of the worst paying industries, I think. And most people probably just thought you'd be mad to be a chef, really. Most kitchens were full of kind of like ex-criminals and wife beaters and alcoholics. I mean, really, but great team workers, really. I mean, that's quite an interesting scenario of that time, actually. I'm going back to the late 80s when I started. But incredible team players, actually. And a lot of these people have worked in some great restaurants, or maybe the Dorchester, Savoy in London. I mean, they had some good background, but the job itself was just a very strange one. People would go off in the afternoon, have a few drinks. They'd wake up in the morning, have a few drinks, and finish their day having a few drinks, really. It was
My God.
different. It's a very different time, really. But within a kitchen situation, would never let their team down. They'd never be off sick because you'd be letting your team down. And there was great camaraderie amongst those vagabonds in many ways. And people worked long and hard hours, the job itself. And I think that's something that's missing from the industry actually today. There's not that much camaraderie. If somebody feels like being sick today, they'll just call in sick, really. They don't really care too much about the team. They're not bothered about being part of that team anymore. I think that's something that's very much, I mean, if I speak to friends from around the world, they all have that same kind of, particularly of my generation, I guess. So yeah, so I pottered around for a couple of years, started my career as a pastry chef, which I guess that was a creative aspect for me always. And then worked in a few good addresses and started to think, actually, if I'm going to do anything with this, I should really go to London, really, because that was where everything was happening. Had been working in the kitchen 2 years by that point in time. Was lucky, I guess, to manage to get into a technical college and do a craft course. But during those 2 years that I was there, I was pretty much had a full-time job, and I was working somewhere pretty much every day, really. And I had 3 or 4 different places where I work. I work every weekend between these 2 hotels called the Stanleylands and the Belfry Hotel. And they, I guess, were my first kind of like, they were the first time that I'd ever stepped foot into a really professional setting, really. All the chefs had some great history behind them. They'd worked in some great addresses. The kitchens back in those days were half French, I'd say, chefs wise, and quite a lot of British chefs that had perhaps spent time in London at some point in time, or up at Gleneagles up in Scotland. I mean, some good, very good culinary addresses.
Gleneagle is
very
there.
maverick kind of
Yeah, very maverick.
culinary addresses, really. And that was my first kind of like contact with this part-time job when I was at college, where I'd work every weekend, dotting between these 2 hotels, interestingly. And I'd finish college 3:30 on a Friday. We used to finish college early on Friday. And I get 2 trains to get to the Belfry, where I'd stay for the weekend, actually. Me and a friend, Neil, who sadly passed away just last year. So we'd go from the college and we'd spend the whole weekend working between these 2 hotels.
And then how did you move to India?
So I'm 16, 17 or something. And it was kind of like we'd go there, we'd reach. It's kind of like, okay, you're staying. And the staff accommodation was always in the attic somewhere, dirty, smelly little space. And then we'd go down to the kitchen, we'd do the dinner shift. And then about 11 o'clock, one of the sous chefs would come up to you and say, be in at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're doing breakfast. So we'd come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that would become an all-day shift until night time. And then maybe a sous chef on a Saturday night would come and give you a bin liner to wear and say, come on, let's come outside, we're cleaning out the freezers. This is like, and by 1 o'clock, freezer, you froze your nuts off, really, for the last 2 hours, just cleaning out the freezers. And at 1 a.m., he'd say to you, okay, be back in the kitchen at 5:30, you're doing a bread shift. So that whole weekend was just like, but it was incredible learning.
Yeah, incredible.
It was amazing, really. I mean, irreplaceable. So I spent some time milling around Manchester, obviously, working in some quite decent places, really. And back in those days, it was kind of like you'd go knocking on doors, literally, seeing what was available. Obviously, we didn't have the internet or anything. We'd be looking at one magazine we had called The Caterer and Hotel Keeper. So you'd look through that, really looking for a good job, good opportunity, or what's trending at the moment. And then you go knocking on the back door. Can I speak to the chef? Is there any openings? Or maybe another friend had said, why don't you go and meet my friend at the whatever. And we moved around a lot back in those days. First went to London with some friends again, actually. a restaurant called Horner's. I was just there a couple of months. And then I went back up to Manchester to work in a hotel called the Victoria and Albert Hotel. And then went back to London again, got an opportunity to work at Bibendum, which is still a legendary restaurant in London. Building-wise, if we've just been talking about your house and Art Deco, but this was what was the original Michelin tire garage in London. Beautiful Art Deco property. These big stained glass windows of the Michelin Man. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful restaurants in the world, built in 1913. And just the whole romance of that property was incredible. Spent a year there. The menu was very seasonal. We hardly placed any orders for anything. Our suppliers would come in every day and just whatever's in season, and we'd buy it, and that was what's on the menu for the next week. So a beautiful seasonal place. That taught me a lot, actually. Worked with Oliver Payton. After that, we opened Mash in Manchester, Mash and Air in Manchester, the UK's first microbrewery, which was based around a Californian concept, Shape and Ease. There was a cafe, and there was a fine dining space called Air. And again, great learning, I think. After the first year of that, I got sent to London. They were opening another Mash, and I ended up being like their corporate pastry chef, working for his company called Gruppo, and wandering between Mash, the Atlantic Bar and Grill, and Coast. The Atlantic was a legendary space in London at the time. Then I spent 2.5 years almost at Quaglino's, massive brasserie, like 312 seats. We'd do 500 for lunch every day, maybe up to 1,000 for dinner. And while I was at Quaglino's, we got invited to be a guest restaurant at something called the World Gourmet Summit. That happens every year in Singapore. Still happens today. And it was kind of like an invite to be like a guest restaurant for 5 days. So they invited 10 known restaurants from around the world. It was a great year, actually. You had Tetsuya Wakuda, you had Charlie Trotter, who was, back in those days, like probably the biggest name in the culinary industry from America. And Trotter was an amazing character, actually. I met lots of people. I mean, it was just a great year for the chefs that were there, actually. Santi Santa Maria, 3-star Michelin chef from Spain, back when people weren't talking about Spanish food, but just the most incredible. I mean, it was just a brilliant bunch of restaurants that were there at that time. I think a lot of people talk about that 2000 edition being probably one of the best ones because lots of names were there. Met lots of people. Got offered lots of jobs all over Asia. And then met this guy called Rohit Khattar. Kept fingering me, pestering me. Why don't you come to India? We're doing something interesting in Delhi. And then later, once I'd gone back, emails, we kept transferring. And I think, so I'd gone there in March. I think in June, he invited me. He said, come to India. Just come for a couple of weeks. I'll pay you a bit of money for your time. Just see what we're doing in India, really. I'll take you to the Taj Mahal. That kind of invite, really. So I came to India, spent a couple of weeks, spent a bit of time with his team also. Went back to London, really didn't think too much of it, really. But by this point in time, I think almost 10 years in London, I was tired, actually. As a chef working through the 90s in London, we worked, like, I think I probably lived off maybe 5.5 hours sleep for years and years, really.
And which was the restaurant that Mr. Khattar invited you to be a part of?
So he was looking after India Habitat Centre at the time, the F&B there. Spent a couple of weeks there, and he kept sending me emails. Why don't you come back? Let's work out something together. Come for a year. I'm planning a couple of new things. And eventually I thought, okay, I'll go for a year. Be great. He offered me 4 return tickets that year and quite a decent amount of money. So I thought, okay, be great. Even if I just catch up on some sleep and then go back to London after a year, it'd be good for me, for my health, I think. So came to India for a year. And we opened India's first food court, which is quite bizarre thinking about it. I mean, obviously it wasn't what I came to India thinking that I was going to get involved in, but we opened Etopia at the India Habitat Centre, which was literally India's first food court.
That's crazy.
Crazy to think about in hindsight. And we opened the diner, which is still like a really cool place to hang out at India Habitat Centre even today. Really. Me and Manish joined on the same day. Interesting. Me and Manish Malhotra, we joined on the same day.
Manish Malhotra from Indian Accent?
Yeah.
Oh, how cool.
He reminded me about that a few years ago, saying, me and you joined on the same day. We had the same joining day. And he continued to work with Rohit until he left Indian Accent.
Yeah.
So that was my first taste of India. And obviously it was an interesting year. I think it was a challenging year for me. I think it was a challenging year for the company to have a foreigner. I'd come from London. I was full of energy, wanting to achieve lots of things, very punctual, reach the morning meetings every day at 9 o'clock, and nobody turning up until 10 o'clock. And I mean, it just drove me nuts. I mean,
I can imagine.
the first year was challenging, I think. And some mornings I'd walk into a meeting, get irritated, and just walk out and not come back for the whole day, really. So I think it was a challenging year for them as well.
So you've called Calcutta your home for like 2 decades
Mm.
now, right? How has the history and the culture influenced your approach to cooking? How has the interpretation of Bengali cuisine changed when it came for you?
So I had a 1 year contract. I had every plans of going back. I was working with Conran restaurants at the time. I decided to take a year off. I'd also discussed internally with them that I'd come back after a year, and they were quite happy with that. And I guess after that year, like I say, I had every plans of going back to the UK. 1 month before my contract got over, 9/11 happened.
Oh my God.
And for people that can't remember that time in history, it was an incredible time, actually. And I remember thinking at the beginning of COVID, it was not that dissimilar, really. So literally, if you were working in any major city in the world ground to a halt. For about 6 months, no international flight took off. So cities just kind of like almost overnight, like fell prey to this kind of like 9/11. Really. Any major city in the world, people weren't traveling. Overnight, restaurants started closing in places like London, Paris. People that had been hoping for better times knew that suddenly that's not going to happen anymore. So I didn't really have a job to go back to, realistically. And luckily, I'd met Priya Paul. I'd actually met Priya Paul's mother that year, Shireen, at a cookery demonstration I was doing. She gave me a card and said, she gave me Priya's card and said, if you plan to stay in India, maybe my daughter might have something. She has some hotels. They're also working on some new projects. And luckily, I got a job working for the park. So that's how I ended up in Calcutta.
Park Hotel.
Yeah. And spent 4 years with them, actually. I think we did quite a lot in that time. Sorry, 3 years. My first job at the park was opening Atrium Cafe. And then pretty much once that was open, I went to Chennai to help Chef Willie open the park in Chennai. And then spent a bit of time in Delhi, relaunching a couple of outlets at the park in Delhi. And then the last thing I did before I left the park was relaunch Flurys in that last year.
Coming to that, because that story is a story that I would love to know. I mean, I know that you've played a key role in reviving Flurys. It's a historic tea room in Calcutta, has significant amount of relevance today as well. What was it like to sort of blend colonial legacy with contemporary tastes that were coming in the new age of 2000s?
So Priya Paul was very committed to the fact that we need to move on, actually, with Flurys. It's time for change. And she'd been planning that for a few years. In fact, when I joined the park, there was always this discussion, some point in time, while you're with us, we're going to relaunch Flurys. So I think the original drawings have been done back in 2000, I think, for the renovation. And interestingly, I'd been working for Conran Restaurants, and Conran Partners did the redesign, actually, of the space and the look and feel and the mood board and everything they'd done. So it was almost like me kind of like coming home with Conran Restaurants, but with Conran being somehow involved in that. So yeah, it was fascinating. So when I was at the park, as executive chef, one of my jobs was to pop into Flurys once a week and see what was happening anyway. So during that period, I'd pop into Flurys. And it was this old factory with a bunch of old, quite militant men working there, but very highly skilled in many ways, really, in what they'd been doing for generations. And there were 3 generations that worked in that factory.
Oh, really?
Almost everybody was from 2 families from UP. When there was a wedding happening, like half the factory would go. And they'd plan it so that most of the weddings would happen off season, so most people could leave and within their village or wherever they'd come from. But incredibly highly skilled individuals, really. And I remember, so the oven in the factory, it was like Baker Perkins oven, and the story of that oven apparently, what people. So I'm this kind of like absorber of stories, really. I mean, I think that's my kind of like gift, I guess. I love to absorb stories and narrate them. I don't think I'm the best storyteller, but I love absorbing them. So the Baker Perkins oven that was there had apparently come into Calcutta in the 1890s sometime, and was originally at the Great Eastern Hotel.
Okay.
And when the Great Eastern Hotel, or maybe coincidentally, when the Great Eastern Hotel was doing their renovation, they put in a brand new kind of like semi-automatic oven, which you see bits of it in the cafe at the Great Eastern today, actually. It was kind of like, I don't know what the name of that oven was, but it was they put in like a semi-automatic brand new American oven they put in. And Mr. Fleury bought that oven when he opened, I guess Flurys back in 1927, so almost 100 years old. I mean, it's quite amazing, really. And the guy that used to work that oven was third generation oven operator. Like, he could barely see. He knew all the hot spots
Oh,
inside the
really?
oven. Yeah, I mean, it was a double deck oven. He had like a 6 foot long peel that he moved trays around. And like I say, he could barely see. He had cataracts. And he was the third generation oven operator. Just imagine. I mean, those kind of stories just don't really exist anymore. But they did very much in Flurys. So yeah, so it was kind of like some point of time, we're going to renovate this place. It was full of really old equipment, which I found fascinating. I've always been quite interested in the old traditions and a lot of stuff they did by hand. They used to make fondant, they used to make beautiful nougat eggs at Easter time. Like I say, had quite a highly skilled bunch, really. And everybody had like dodgy birth certificates. There were like 70-odd-year-olds working in there that were only supposed to be 55, I think. But yeah, I mean, such a great story. I think that part of Flurys history was. And then there was obviously Flurys itself, really, which was this I thought a beautiful space, really, with all these wooden, like teak showcases, glass opening. There was no refrigeration in those days.
So how'd you keep things cold?
So you didn't. Almost everything was buttercream anyway, really. So buttercream doesn't need to be refrigerated. And then they had the kitchen at the back, which did things that they were famous for their omelettes. They were famous for not many things, actually. Things on toast. They had ham on toast, cheese on toast. And I guess for me, it was kind of like, okay, so we're going to renovate Flurys. This is our plan. We wanted to come up with something new, but we need to be careful also. We need to keep the heritage alive. It's also very important for the family as well, really. So even just thinking about Priya Paul, she'd grown up there, going there every day during the 80s, meeting her mother after school, and she'd worked there as well. Her mum used to manage that outlet, which is a great story. So the whole family was somehow involved in that. They all had their favourite things. I had emails coming from everybody's office around the country. I think even a couple of mails came from Lord Paul's office in London. Like, make sure you don't change this. It's always been my favourite. So it was kind of like, it's a bit of a challenge, really. It's like, where do we start with all of this? Really, I mean, it's like, don't touch that. Don't. And obviously the guests were like, I think some guests were probably quite happy that something new was happening, but a lot of people were furious. It was kind of, how can you change this? It's kind of like part of something I've grown up coming to every day. So I thought, obviously many discussions, many trials and things. And it was like, let's do something more, let's make it more of a cafe, I think, more than the tea room that it was, I guess. So yeah, so that was what we became, really, this bit more, well, much more modern variation. But all those things had to stay. All those cubes, the rum balls, the chocolate boats, all those family favourites are still there.
I mean, I would be pretty mad if you took
Yeah,
away.
exactly. And so some of those things have also changed over the years. I guess since that original, when we first changed a lot of things. And then, so I left in 2005. I opened the Blue Potato, which is a different story. And then I went back and consulted with them again, I think 2008, 9, 10. And again, we did another reincarnation, a little bit more. We started very different packaging, started those like putting the cakes in tins and all that kind of stuff, which is much more of the retail side of Flurys now, I guess, also. Which they've also continued.
Tell me something about the blue potato. It's iconic for the time it was. It's a completely fresh concept that probably Calcutta hadn't ever seen. My mum used to, as of an hour ago, told me that you used to sign every menu card and the menu used to change every month. Things like this used to not exist in Calcutta, especially in those.
Don't exist today.
Still doesn't exist today. How do you think the Calcutta diners responded to Blue Potato and the modern and global take that you brought to the local cuisine?
Yeah, no, so I had great clientele. So a small little restaurant, 36 seats it was, just opposite. So as you enter Outram Street, opposite Chapamburg.
Yeah.
It's just on the right-hand side, tiny little space. It was a very cute space, had some beautiful prints on the wall of...
And this was your own restaurant?
So I was a partner.
You're a partner?
It was two people that talked me into it, really.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, if I'm going to do a restaurant, I want to do it properly. I don't want to mess around. So we'll have beautiful white linen tables. We'll have beautiful glassware, beautiful tableware. We'll have beautiful crockery. And let's do it properly. Let's not mess around. I'll change the menu every month. And I'll sign all the menus. And the menu can be for anybody to take home with them also. And I used to date all the menus, sign them all. On the first of every month, we'd start a new menu. We had specials throughout the month also. And a lot of imported stuff on that menu also. Whatever one supplier, mainly one supplier in Bombay, whatever was coming in, I'd put on the menu, really. So I'd have things like langoustine, crayfish, foie gras on the menu.
It's foie gras in
Yeah,
Calcutta.
yeah. I can't tell you what my best-selling item was on the menu because we don't talk about that anymore in India. But that was my best-selling, the best-selling thing on my menu. Everybody came for me looking for that steak. Followed by fish, which, I mean, nobody can imagine. Nobody in the country will say that. Everybody will say chicken is the best-selling item, or paneer or something, depending on where you are in the country. But certainly not fish as a meat as your first two, for sure. So we ran that restaurant for almost 2 years. And there was this whole thing. So I'd gone into this restaurant knowing that it might take a little while to get a liquor license. And for me, it was kind of like, without wine, how can I have a restaurant like this? So it was kind of like modern French, really, I guess, in lots of ways. Beautiful food, beautiful presentations. In fact, even looking back at the photos now, it's kind of like, my God, we were doing stuff like that. And I almost forgot those menus that we were doing there. Yeah, so it was like about a year and a half in that we realized that we're not going to get a liquor license, actually. Whatever anybody's saying.
That's a bit of a problem in Calcutta to
It's
get.
never going to happen.
Yeah.
And at the time, they'd been kind of like, so that we're going back to communist days in Calcutta. And at the time, the communists, at one point in time, had just been giving out licenses to anybody. And there was a high court order that stopped any issuing of new licenses. And for about 5 years, there was no new license issued in Calcutta, interestingly, around that time. But also, there's a clause in when you're applying for a license that you have to be within, beyond 1,000 feet of a place of regular worship, school, college, hospital. And we had a chapel literally 300 feet away from us, really. And everybody kept saying, no, and we met lots of excise people. Oh, don't worry about it. Okay, we'll manage something. It's just a chapel. No, well, yeah, just a chapel, don't worry about it. And then eventually, when we saw the blueprint of the city, it said church. And it was like, we're never going to get a liquor license. So quite quickly, I closed it. I just said, then I'm not willing to carry on. Yeah. And by that point of time, I think I had great clientele. Everybody loved the food. But people just started calling up saying, have you got liquor license yet? Okay, let us know when you have. And we'll come. It became like that. I mean, I'd have an old Bengali couple stepping out of a white ambassador, like red bordered sari, beautifully spoken, was well aware of what foie gras was, and they'd tell me stories about, when we're in Paris. And I mean, there's a very different clientele than I see today, actually.
So you've mentioned that you love bastardizing traditional Bengali dishes in playful ways, which I think is a very cool way of innovating. Could you share an example of a classic Bengali recipe that you've reinvented and that has surprised yourself as well?
So either me or you are going to get crucified for saying that, really. So if I go back to the start of my career, my whole life has been about ingredients, really. Ingredients-based cooking. So whatever beautiful ingredients we have, that's what we'll cook with. So Bengali cuisine I love Bengali food. In fact, my favorite Bengali food is vegetarian. I'm forever being asked about this, but vegetarian cuisine in Bengal is probably the best vegetarian food in the country. Nobody talks about it, but that's different subjects. Very seasonal. It uses pretty much anything. We have the best looking markets during the season than anywhere else in the country. So for me, it's more about ingredient-based cooking, really. Obviously, I'll play on Bengali themes, if you like, but I'll never cook anything. I don't cook Bengali food. There's plenty of... I'm usually surrounded by lots of Bengali chefs who cook delicious Bengali food. So I'll kind of like take something and think, what can we do with this? Or let's change it completely. Or I like the flavor of that. How can I put that flavor into something else? So that's always been kind of like my fascination. Yeah, so bastardizing. I mean, what does bastardization mean, I think? I mean, so you travel around the world and food's been constantly bastardized. Or, if you ask me personally, what does tradition mean? It really doesn't exist, really, beyond your mother's cooking and your grandmother's cooking. Nobody knows really what was cooked in your house 3 generations ago. Even if it's traditional dishes that you think today, it would have been cooked very differently then, because you probably didn't have ingredients that you use today. It's also a fascinating scenario. I keep saying to people, to the media today, that in another 10 years' time, you'll find a young 18-year-old that will fight that Maggie has been part of our cuisine for generations. Then they'll fight you to the death, believing that it has. So one of the first things I wanted. So when we started the tasting menu at the Penthouse, and I want to do something that's based around Bengal stories, actually. So I've been doing pop-ups in the UK for years, going back long before COVID, and I'd always talk about Bengal stories. So whether that be a menu based around a Gondoraj lebu, which I used to take from here, or around some bandel cheese. So more ingredient based than anything else, really. I think one of the first things, one of my early playing around things was a paturi with a vegetarian style with jackfruit, and there's some bandel cheese in there. And something for vegetarians, really, so you could kind of like, obviously the flavors were relatively the same, really. Even if I'm making paturi today, and I'm doing it relatively traditionally, with a nice mustard paste and ginger, green chili, most likely put some raw mango in it if I can find it. I think it's a great addition to anything fish. I think a mustard. So yeah, so it's always about maybe adding a flavor or removing something or completely changing something. I think out of all, so I've done many tasting menus. I think one that keeps coming back because everybody loves it so much is on the menu. It's just written 12-hour slow cooked kid goat, 12-hour long cooked kid goat, rice veloute, confit potato, and crispy onions. Now that for me was kind of like, I want to do something with rice and mutton. And I thought, I don't just want to do biryani, but let me pull out all the things from a biryani. So we have mutton in there. So that's cooked really, really slow in a combi oven for like 12 hours. So it's really tender and almost falling, really. There's a basmati, like a overcooked biryani, if you like, rice that I make into a veloute with lots of ghee. So it's like a sauce on the plate. And people can never believe that it's actually not rice. So that's a rice element. And then there's a piece of confit potato, which is cooked in the stock from the mutton when it's cooked. So confit potato is, in the classical French sense, is a piece of potato that's cooked half in stock with lots of butter or ghee in this situation. And obviously that's to some extent the nicest bit of a biryani, really. It's this piece of potato that's sat in a stock simmering away there. I've always hated the egg in a biryani. It has this kind of like this way too overcooked. So I serve a nice soft boiled egg with my interpretation of a deconstructed, bastardized biryani. And there's some crispy onions on it. And again, a lot more ghee, just because everybody likes crispy onions.
Yeah.
So that's something that's always intrigues people, whether it be people from around the world or guests that are coming from anywhere in India. Really. It's kind of like, oh yeah, it tastes like biryani, but also it's not.
You've been deeply involved in culinary education as well.
Mm,
I would like to delve a little bit into that, especially with
mm.
IIHM and initiatives such as Young Chefs Olympiad. What advice would you give to young chefs about blending global techniques with local traditions?
So if you study culinary arts pretty much anywhere in the world, you'll be taught through those basic classical French books, which to start it, in my mind, it's still as apparent today as it probably always was, really. So, and I never learnt culinary arts, but I've been involved in education. I used to do classes in London for cordon bleu, so I understand their syllabuses. And you start off talking about the bee, which is by far the most important thing within the food chain. Really. Without bees, we don't have anything. Really. And how we preserve and protect those. So, if you go to France, if you go to any culinary institute, or first thing they'll probably do is, as a off-site thing, they'll take to meet a beekeeper and understand him. And then they'll probably take you to a farm to understand how vegetables grow. So it's about understanding the basics, really, and respecting the ingredients that you have. I think a lot of chefs don't respect ingredients at all today, very sadly. It's just something that half the ingredients go in the bin today, really. We were always taught that you really don't throw away anything, really. It's like an animal. You use the whole animal. It's died to be put on your plate. You need to use all of it, really. And again, I think studying culinary arts, again, you probably go and meet a guy who's a shepherd and understand how well he looks after his sheep, and it's time for them to leave him, really. So just understanding those basic fundamentals of everything, really. And I think that's probably one of the things I think through whatever years of education I was involved. It was much more about respecting ingredients and respecting your space. One of the first classes I used to take with the first years, I'd walk in the kitchen and say, just quickly tidy up before I come back. I'd come back in 10 minutes. And then 10 minutes later, I'd come back and I'd say, kitchen clean? Yes, sir. And I was like, but this is not clean, is it? So I'll come back in 15 minutes, just, and I could do that for a whole 2 hours, really. And then I'd start turning tables upside down, start pulling out fridges, just to make them understand. And that's something that so many students come back to me and say, one of the worst classes you ever gave us was cleaning your kitchen, turning it upside down. But it's probably the best lesson we ever learned when we went overseas. And I think, so those basics and those fundamentals are the most important thing. We actually started off with a Young Chef India competition. That's where all these competitions started. And this was Suborno Bose. Actually just was out having a chat. And he said, let's start a India schools competition. I think within 2 months, we'd started that competition and finished it. And we took 6 finalists to Bangkok. And then the next year, Sumit from the Telegraph, who used to be the editor, he'd come up with this one line of cook a curry, fly to London. So that was our second generation. Well, the next year, actually, it was kind of like, I think we had about 2,000 participants from India schools, if you like. And we took 8 finalists to London to compete in the final at University of West London. And it was such a great concept, really. The whole country got behind it. I think obviously a lot of people, a lot of youngsters got involved in thinking this is exciting. And that went on for years. It's still happening today. I think at its peak, it was about 40,000 participants pan-India with kind of like IHM chefs going around the country to schools and just doing basic taste tests and stuff just to try and dwindle these numbers down. And then the next one was Young Chef Olympiad, which to a certain extent I was very involved, obviously right from year one. But this was a discussion that Suborno Bose and Professor David Foskett had at University of West London. And it was like, why don't we do something globally where we invite culinary art students to India? And I remember David thinking, it's a bit of a crazy situation, really. In the first year, you might get 5 countries participating. And in the first year, I think we had 15 participate. And that was really, I guess, countries wanting to come to India to see what India was up to, I think. Obviously, people are very curious about India. I think by year 3, we had about 53 countries coming to India.
Oh, how lovely.
So our Young Chef Olympiad is going to be next month. We start on the 1st of Feb. I think this year we'll probably have about 50. Very difficult to get beyond 50. There's always some dropouts toward the end. But we invite culinary art students from different countries. And we have a participating country with a student and a mentor. So we're actually traveling around the country and including 30 international judges. I mean, it's a big group of people that's traveling around the country. About 140, 150 in total. I've literally seen our students all over the world, actually, over the years. And it's also been quite nice to see, actually. Chef, nice to see you. Like in London, in Paris, kind of thing. I've come across them. I still find them in hotels today when I'm checking in at kind of like 11:30 at night in God knows where, Pune or something. And somebody will say, Chef, let me upgrade you to a suite. And I'm thinking, honestly, I'm fine, actually. If I upgrade me to a suite, it's 11:30 already. I'm out at 7:30 in the morning. It's going to take me half an hour to turn all the lights off. But it's a nice, but thank you.
As someone who's made Calcutta their home for nearly 2 decades, how do you see its food scene evolving, especially in the next decade? Are there any traditions that you hope that the new generations of chefs will carry forward?
I think Calcutta is an ever-changing food landscape. A much poorer rap than it probably deserves, I think. If you take any metro, I think generally Calcutta, at every price point, probably has the best food in the country, I think, if I'm honest. I think always has had. And for the main reason, Bengalis just won't eat rubbish, really. They'll tell you, they'll throw it back in your face saying this is rubbish. Well, I think in other places they won't, actually. I mean, even today, a lot of places where I go in Delhi or Bombay, if I go for Chinese food, unless it's a really high-end restaurant, the food is awful, actually. But the level of Chinese food is just fantastic. I think the level of good North Indian food has always been great in Calcutta. I think the level, just generally across. And at every price point, I think. So obviously we've had this kind of like procession of brands coming in from around the country. Everybody wanting to be around Park Street for some reason, which is quite nice. It's been nice to see that revival of Park Street, I think. I still think most of my top 50 lists, so about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, I did my top 50 list for Condé Nast. I think most of those restaurants haven't changed that much even today, really. Still, some of my favorite like Chinese food in the country, in the city, are still a couple of places in Tangra, and still a few old favorites. I still have my favorite kind of like places for biryani and kebabs. I don't think those have changed that much, really, but it's nice to see lots of things happening in the city. I still think, unfortunately, I think we need an influx of maybe 500,000 young professionals coming into the city, earning over a lakh a month. Then the whole demographic will change overnight, which is what you've seen in pretty much every other city. I'd read something a couple of years ago, I think in Bangalore, there are around 7 million young professionals that earn over a lakh a month, and about 3 million of them earn over 2 lakhs a month. So there's just a lot more people out. There's a lot more things happening. And I guess until we reach that point, I guess we're still going to be stuck with that massive cluster and clamour of restaurants within a quarter of a mile around Park Street. And not that much more exciting, let's say, in the modern day context, anywhere else, really, which is a bit of a shame, I think. Whereas if you walk into a Bombay, then every nook and cranny and corner of Bombay has something cool happening today. So I think we're still far away from that. I think it's great that you have whatever Sienna has been doing over the last X amount of years. I think it's great to be highlighting Bengali food, which I still think has some of the best flavors and some of the most unappreciated flavors because people just don't know about them. Bengalis don't talk too much beyond kosher mangsho and their fish preparations, which has always been very saddening for me. I think Amar Kama are doing a great job at the moment, trying to promote Bengal and its ingredients and how you can use them. And I think we're going to see probably more of that, really, which is quite exciting.
So I'm going to skip to a little bit of a fun and fire. It's just light-hearted and short questions. You can give us short answers. Let's begin. If you had to pick one underrated Bengali ingredient that the world should know about, which one would it be and why?
Goina bori, this lentil paste that's dried out to add a little bit of extra protein to your food. And the Bengalis decorate it in the style of jewelry, which is, again, very poetic and a very Bengali-esque.
Most underrated food in Kolkata?
Bengali vegetarian cuisine.
Calcutta's fine dining. Thriving or pretending?
I don't really see much. We have traditional restaurants, lots of family service, which people might call fine dining.
So for all our viewers who love to cook at home, give us one simple tip that you have that can add that Kenworthy magic to home cooking.
So I think we're incredibly blessed in Calcutta to have that local bazaar. And we have such beautiful fresh produce. Why would people be going to supermarkets and buying from Blinkit? So yeah, just go to the market, pick up some seasonal ingredients.
I want you to finish this line. Kolkata is home for me because
this incredible place of history on so many levels.
Historical figures you could invite for a dinner. Who would they be?
Be somebody from music, somebody from art. Maybe Prince would be an interesting character to invite. Roald Dahl, perhaps.
Thank you so much, Chef Shaun Kenworthy, for being on our show. I think it's been an absolute eye-opener learning so much about the F&B industry, and especially the F&B industry in the city of joy.
And for anybody, I think, just explore this incredible city. Next time you walk through the city, I know a lot of people don't even do that, but just keep looking up and seeing what beautiful architecture we have. Jump on a ferry, go across the river, just like that. Drink some chai, see what the hawkers are selling on the ferry. Go up to Kumatuli, run around, chat with the artisans, all those kind of